The papacy, the office held by the Pope as the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, is one of the oldest continuous institutions in the world. Rooted in tradition, doctrine, and centuries of history, the papacy represents not only a spiritual authority, but also a complex interplay of politics, culture, and global influence. As we look toward the future, a pressing question arises. Will the next pope be different? And if so, in what ways? To understand the future of the papacy, it is essential to look at the path it has taken so far. The modern papacy has been shaped by a succession of popes, each leaving their mark in unique ways. Pope John Paul II, for instance, was a global figure who combined deep spirituality with a political edge, instrumental in confronting communism and revitalizing the Church's presence across continents. His long reign was followed by Pope Benedict XVI, a theologian who sought to reinforce Catholic doctrine but shocked the world when he resigned, a rare act that opened a door for change. Then came Pope Francis, from Argentina. He was the first Jesuit pope, the first from the Americas, and the first non-European in over 1,200 years. His papacy has been characterized by a focus on humility, outreach to the marginalized, care for the environment, and an emphasis on mercy rather than dogma. He washed the feet of prisoners, embraced migrants, and spoke openly about reform within the Church. For many, he has been a breath of fresh air. For others, a controversial figure who challenged the status quo. As Pope Francis ages, speculation grows about who might follow him, and whether that person will continue his legacy or take the Church in a different direction. Several key factors will influence this. First, the demographics of the Catholic Church are shifting. Today, the majority of Catholics live in the global South, in Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia. This global redistribution could influence the College of Cardinals, the body responsible for electing the Pope, to consider candidates from regions that more accurately reflect the Church's population. Secondly, the issues facing the Church today are vastly different from those of the past. There are growing calls for inclusivity, on the roles of women, LGBTQ+ rights, clerical celibacy, and transparency regarding abuse scandals. A new pope will need to confront these topics with courage and clarity, knowing that the Church must evolve while remaining anchored in its core beliefs. Furthermore, technology and digital culture are reshaping how religious communities engage with the faithful. The next pope might be someone adept at digital evangelization, someone who understands how to reach younger generations not through encyclicals alone, but through social media, podcasts, and interactive platforms. But alongside this modernization, there's also a conservative undercurrent. Many within the Church feel that tradition must be protected, not diluted. Some cardinals and bishops may push for a pope who reasserts orthodoxy, returns to Latin liturgies, and upholds strict doctrinal interpretations. This tension between reform and tradition is one of the defining dynamics shaping the future of the papacy. The process of selecting a new pope, called a conclave, is secretive, steeped in ceremony, and unpredictable. Cardinals from around the world gather in the Sistine Chapel, cut off from the outside world, and vote until one name emerges. Historically, compromise candidates have often won, men seen as bridges between factions. But compromise doesn't mean lack of vision. Often, such popes become transformative figures. So, what qualities might define the next pope? He could be young, or at least younger than his predecessors, to energize the Church with vitality. He might come from Africa, where the Church is growing rapidly and vibrantly. He may be someone who speaks multiple languages fluently, understands geopolitical realities, and embodies both compassion and strength. There is also the question of whether a future pope could be more progressive in embracing dialogue with other faiths, pushing for interreligious peace, and even reconsidering long-held positions on marriage, priesthood, and gender roles. Or will the next pope be a doctrinal stalwart who recenters the Church on traditional values? It's worth noting that while the pope holds immense power, He does not act unilaterally. The global church is a vast organism with various theological currents. The Pope sets the tone, opens doors, and defines priorities, but change in Catholicism is often slow, deliberate, and measured. Still, symbolic gestures carry weight. Imagine a pope who appoints more women to senior roles in the Vatican, who opens forums for lay people to participate in shaping doctrine, who brings the church closer to indigenous and oppressed communities. Such a pope would mark a clear evolution. As we look ahead, it's not only about who the next pope will be, but what vision he will bring. Will he see the church as a fortress to defend or a home to open wider? Will he build bridges or boundaries? Will he speak to the wounds of the world with empathy or seek refuge in theological purity? Whatever happens, the future of the papacy will echo far beyond the walls of the Vatican. It will impact millions, shape moral discourse, influence global politics, and either invite more people into the fold or risk losing relevance in an ever-changing world. The choice of the next pope is not just about continuity or change. It's about the soul of an institution at a crossroads. A church that has survived empires, schisms, and revolutions must now navigate a century marked by complexity, diversity, and rapid transformation. The world will be watching. Not just Catholics, but all those who look to the Vatican for moral leadership, spiritual insight, and a voice of conscience in turbulent times. The next pope will inherit both a sacred tradition and a fragile moment. What he does with it will define not only his papacy, but perhaps the future of faith itself. And so we wait, with hope, with uncertainty, and with a deep understanding that the papacy, for all its ceremony and age-old structure, is not immune to change, but is instead, once again, on the brink of it. Yet, amid all the speculation about who the next pope might be, we must also reflect on what the church truly needs right now. Not just in terms of leadership style, but in the kind of presence that can speak meaningfully to the 21st century soul. We live in an age of unprecedented connectivity, but also profound loneliness. Economic inequality, mental health crises, wars, climate catastrophes, and a growing distrust in institutions have left many searching, not just for truth, but for belonging. The next pope, in this regard, will not only be a religious figurehead, but potentially a global healer. Someone who understands that doctrine alone cannot soothe a grieving world. Compassion, listening, and pastoral care must stand alongside tradition and theology. Take, for example, the youth. A significant portion of young people are leaving organized religion or identifying as spiritual but not religious. This is not always out of rebellion, but often disillusionment. Many see religion as rigid, outdated, or irrelevant to their lived experiences. The next pope must wrestle with this disconnect. Will he dismiss these concerns, or will he lean in with empathy, inviting questions rather than shutting them down, offering guidance without judgment? There is also the growing desire for transparency and accountability, not just in addressing the clerical abuse scandals that have haunted the church for decades, but in financial practices, decision-making, and power dynamics. The faithful are no longer satisfied with reassurances. They seek action, justice, and genuine change. A pope who champions institutional honesty could restore credibility to an institution many see with skeptical eyes. And then there's the environment. Pope Francis' landmark encyclical Laudato Si reframed environmental care as a spiritual obligation, urging the world to see the planet as a common home. But the next pope could build on this, not just through words, but through practical alliances, perhaps partnering more visibly with scientists, indigenous leaders, and activists to forge a moral movement around sustainability. Imagine a papacy where ecological responsibility isn't a side message, but central to the church's mission, where parishes are empowered to become centers of environmental education and action, where the Vatican itself becomes a model of green innovation. Such a move would not only serve creation, but capture the imagination of the next generation. Another area to consider is reconciliation. The world is fractured politically, racially, ideologically. The church, too, is not immune to internal division, with tensions between progressives and conservatives, between traditional liturgical preferences and modern expressions of faith. The next pope may have to serve as a reconciler-in-chief, someone who doesn't merely take sides, but finds common ground, who sees unity not as uniformity, but as a diversity held together in love. Consider the potential of a pope who creates intentional spaces for dialogue among Catholics of all stripes, who invites both laypeople and clergy into meaningful conversations about the Church's future, not to erase differences, but to ensure that those differences don't become divisions. And while the next pope will undoubtedly influence the direction of the Church, he will also symbolize it. His background, the name he chooses, his first words on the balcony, his early gestures, these will all send messages. Will he kneel to wash feet on his first Holy Thursday? Will he visit a war zone within months of his election? Will he appoint a woman as head of a Vatican department within his first year? Symbolic actions, though seemingly small, can create ripple effects that challenge long-standing norms and inspire millions. Furthermore, there's the idea of a more globally integrated papacy. In the past, popes often operated from a Roman-centric mindset. But today, the Vatican is increasingly aware that its moral authority must reflect its truly global constituency. A pope who travels widely, not just to major cities, but to forgotten corners of the world, can send a powerful message that no one is beyond the reach of God's love or the Church's care. What if the next pope were to establish regional councils with real authority, allowing local churches to have a stronger voice in shaping pastoral priorities? Such decentralization could empower communities and ensure that Catholicism does not feel imposed, but incarnated, deeply embedded in local cultures and needs. Of course, all of this rests on a deeper truth. The papacy is not just about governance, it's about witness. The most transformative popes have been those who lived their message with integrity, who embodied hope when the world teetered on the edge, and who reminded people that holiness is not about perfection, but about presence. In this sense, the next pope doesn't need to have all the answers, but he does need to be real. Real in his struggles, real in his prayers, real in his love for the people. The world doesn't need a superhero pope, it needs a shepherd. And so, as the curtain slowly begins to rise on the next chapter of the papacy, the question isn't just who will wear the white cassock, but what kind of world he will inherit, and what kind of church he will shape in response. Will he build on the foundations laid by Francis, or chart a different course entirely? Will he redefine the role of the church in modern society, or reaffirm its traditional stance? Will he lead boldly or cautiously? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. The next pope will step into a world brimming with both peril and promise. And how he navigates that terrain may well determine not just the future of Catholicism, but the place of faith itself in the human story. But beyond doctrine, demographics, or even technology lies a deeper truth. The next pope must be a shepherd of souls in a world that is increasingly fragmented. Wars rage on in different parts of the globe. Climate change threatens the most vulnerable, and a generation of young people are searching, not just for answers, but for meaning, connection, and purpose. The church has a chance to speak into that void, not with judgment, but with healing. The next pope must ask not only how to lead the church, but how to serve humanity. We must also ask ourselves, what does moral leadership look like today? It's not only about making pronouncements from balconies or issuing official teachings. It's about showing up in disaster zones, refugee camps, and digital spaces. It's about standing with the voiceless, calling out injustice, and challenging systems that dehumanize. The world doesn't just need a pope who preserves tradition. It needs a pope who lives the gospel in action. Whether through policy or presence, the next pope will be judged not just by Catholics, but by a watching world. And that world is crying out for unity, for truth, for compassion. The papacy, if embraced boldly, can still be a powerful force for good, a compass for lost generations, a balm for divided nations, and a voice that reminds us, above all, of our shared dignity. And perhaps that's the most powerful role the next pope can play, not merely as a ruler of a religious institution, but as a symbol of hope in uncertain times. A leader who dares to listen before speaking, who leads with humility before authority, and who understands that the greatest power lies not in control, but in compassion. As the conclave looms, it won't just be a matter of white smoke rising. It will be a moment that could redefine what the papacy stands for in the 21st century. Will the church cling to what was or rise into what could be? In that tension lies the future, not only of Catholicism, but of faith, influence, and moral leadership in a world desperately searching for direction.